we have a special guest who hasn't been announced yet, His Excellency Minister Mastur from Afghanistan. He's the Minister of Economy. Please take a seat here as well. We have enough microphones. One for you, keep one, and we pass one to you as well. Okay, so the topic of our discussion is how to engage more stakeholders. I would just first of all like to ask, why is there a lack of stakeholders in the first place in the Caspian region? I think Ms. Teplitskaia has just joined us. Fantastic to have you as well. All right, so the question is, why is there a lack of stakeholders in the Greater Caspian region? Why is there?
Thank you. Well, if I may start with a slight disagreement, I don't think that there is a lack of stakeholders. I think there is a sometimes lack of order of stakeholders, because any projects includes different stakeholders, which include local governments, international, domestic investors, the people, obviously, and whoever is in charge should be prioritizing, there should be clear understanding who is the project for, who are the key stakeholders, and who is going to be the starting point from it. And based on that, you have to make the proper structuring of it.
Igor, do you think there is a lack of stakeholder, and why?
Well, I also don't think that there are so much lack of stakeholders. Actually, it is a lack of good projects in a region. If we have some profitable projects which could be interesting on a social level, on a government level, and from economical point of view, then we easily can find stakeholders. But projects in the region, in the Caspian regions, there are not so many interesting ones. And as soon as our visionaries, our governments, and the consulting companies probably will develop the vision to find such kind of projects, probably regional ones, even international, like Silk Road, for instance, initiative, then we will have enough stakeholders.
Christina, purpose entertainment. I mean, entertainment is about fun, it's about interesting projects. Would you agree with Igor that there is just not enough interesting projects around?
Well, so first of all, my background is actually in space. So I managed Buzz Aldrin, Apollo 11 astronaut. I work with a lot of astronauts, with a lot of people in the space business. So interestingly, I think space is one area where the Caspian region is actually quite interested. There's a lot of opportunities for small satellite companies, getting engaged with like components, that sort of thing. So I think there's interest there. I think maybe there's a lack of awareness of other areas that they can try to be involved with the SDGs. And that part of the reason I'm here is because I think that space could solve or play a big role in SDG 4 through 17. And I can explain, I think, all the ways that that would be. But I think that's awareness is probably the biggest thing, because I get contacted from a lot of Caspian regions about getting into small satellites, that sort of thing.
Boris, how to engage more stakeholders, and do you think there is a lack of them?
I'm Alexander. Businesses in their current activity must keep attention to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I have some presentation concerning this activity. If it's possible, I will show it to people.
Yes, we can bring that up, I think. Katharina, there is a PowerPoint presentation. How long does it take? A couple of slides?
Not more than 5 minutes.
All right. No, it's not working. All right. We don't have them. Okay. Would you like to expand on this a bit later, or include in your answer right now?
Maybe a little bit later, because maybe remote control will be.
Okay, fantastic. Linar, what's your opinion?
Well, I think in our regions it's very important that the governments, being one of the major stakeholders of all the initiatives that are taking place in our countries, they give proper signals. And I think the lack of the projects that my colleague was telling about is about the comprehension that the governments have regarding the projects that will bring other stakeholders and give them a proper signal to come in and join. So I think the proper signaling is a very solid job of the government as a stakeholders. And just like the way it is done in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, Central Asia is almost the same, very much government-driven. If the signal is properly accepted, then normally business comes and joins those kind of initiatives. I think in terms of involving more stakeholders to the Caspian region overall, it's very important that we come up with projects that will be kind of interregional or involving a number of countries where it's not only about Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, or Russia or some, but rather...
Are you talking about the Belt and Road Initiative as well, and really
that's one
connecting
of them, right.
with the whole
and
initiative?
And I think the initiative of Caspian Week and signal that is trying to deliver to the world is that let's consider our region not only as a place where we have lake, sea kind of logistics, but it's rather more comprehensive. It is interrelated to other regions, and we are integrated part of the whole new concepts of development of the economies.
Minister Mastur, of course you're from Afghanistan. Afghanistan just had peace talks with the Taliban and US and so on in Doha. So engaging stakeholders seems difficult because the history of insecurity and conflict in recent years has been very sad. So how can you get more people on board and attract more foreign investment?
Thank you. Engaging more stakeholders, it depends to the initiatives of the host government as well. There are some stakeholders on the globally, they attached their programs to certain goals of SDGs, and in every country they are doing the same thing. But then on the country level, it is up to the country how they do a division of labor, how they prepare a program, and how they engage different partners. Luckily, in my country, the stakeholders, in terms of the number, in terms of the quality of their engagement, it's good. Not only it is donors, not only UN agencies, civil society, NGOs, private sector, and not in many other areas. Private sector in Afghanistan is interested in SDGs. And more than that, what we've done, an initiative that I took, because Minister of Economy in Afghanistan leading the SDG agenda in the country, we engaged academic institutions, and now we are working on an initiative called One Goal, One University. So we are engaging universities in each goal so that they could make or help us with researches, studies on that goal, and then there is also a healthy competition among those universities. So it depends to the government how they engage different partners.
And have you noticed more donations and more fundraising from multinational donors and also United Nations? Like the World Bank has recently again put in, I think, $1 billion in the fund that they have in Afghanistan, or do you think there's less interest now?
At least one difference between the programs that multilateral financial institutions were taking care and UN agencies. In MDGs, there was a really lack of interest by World Bank or ADB or Asian Development Bank or other regional banks. But on the contrary, on SDGs, we see that World Bank created a vice presidency for SDGs, and also IMF at the highest level, at the managing director, deputy managing director level, they are interested. But I see that engagement of all their country level offices in SDG, they are great. But then on the global level also, for example, only on the climate change, we see that over $100 billion are there, or other crowdfunding initiatives are there for certain goals. So I think that the funding is not a big issue. How you program, how you prioritize, how you localize the SDGs. For example, in Afghanistan, out of 17 goals, we taken care only 16, because one of those goals is about underwater life, which we are a landlocked country and we are not, it's not related to us. And also we limited the number of targets 210 because not all targets are the top priority for us.
Ms. Teplitskaia, you are the advisor to the chairman and CEO of Sberbank, one of the biggest banks in Russia. When you talk to him and to your clients as well, do you feel there is a stronger interest now to invest in the Caspian region and to engage those stakeholders?
I'd like to elaborate a little bit. We are the largest in Central and Eastern Europe, not just in Russia. We have 151 million clients in 20 countries and 300,000 employees in the bank. So we start from ourselves. When we talk about SDGs, we actually started action from ourselves. And I can tell you that even at home, I really started managing my own waste in a very different way. And I think if 300,000 employees of the bank do the same, and we all started doing it, it's really something that gets engraved in you, and indeed we communicate and collaborate with our clients. And when it comes
give
to
us an example. How do you do your waste management?
We have
we
a
can
separate,
learn from you.
Well, we have a separate waste management in bank offices, and I can probably surprise you. We collect Nescafe coffee capsules and recycle them. I don't think you will find any other organization in Russia easily which would do the same. But we work a lot with the youth. And we outreach a lot to youth and to children through education. And Sberbank supports education. It's one of the highest priorities. And when we talk about SDGs, of course, we know Fall 17, and we strive to facilitate achievement of all the goals. But indeed, I agree that country to country, the priority of SDGs varies. And when we talk about actual engagement, and this is what I think we're here to talk about, we first of all need to define who our stakeholders are. And when we talk about countries, there are governments and there are corporations. Are we a conscious capitalism company? Or are we actually Milton Friedman type of a company which takes just shareholders' interests at heart? And I think it starts at the root. And our bank is a conscious capitalism corporation. We are multinational in the sense of our shareholder base, and we try to implement ESGs even in our investments. We just started criteria for investment based on ecological and sustainable behavior of our clients. So I don't want to take too much of the time, but I believe that proper communication with the stakeholders, when you have a matrix, when you prioritize, and the law of 80-20, you pick your 20% that have the multiple effect, and of course, resources are scarce, but if we're to engage the stakeholders, we need to know who our stakeholders are, how to talk to them, because you cannot talk. The United Nations has this major groups of society, and this is not a joke. You cannot appeal to the same groups in a cookie-cutter way. So I think this is very important.
Great. Let's get a concrete example. For example, from ABB Power Grids, right? So how concretely do you engage your stakeholders? And to get back to her comment just now, who are your main stakeholders in the Caspian region?
Yes, ABB is a... Yes, ABB is a global company. And for sure, we're having our offers in power grids and industrial automation, mostly high-tech products. And when we talking to our stakeholders in the region, first of all, I have in mind Caspian region stakeholders. We're always trying to find all pain points of the project. And one of the pain points quite often, it is lack of financing for local or regional projects.
And what is the main reason for the lack of fundraising?
Because probably the project is not fully ready. They didn't find some banks who are supporting them, or
what about geopolitical issues and political reasons?
That's sometimes it's not only geopolitical. It's sometimes not professionalism of some companies who are willing to change something in their business models. And we understand this, and that is why we decided to cooperate with export credit agencies. There are about 40 in the world. For instance, in Switzerland it's SURF, or in Germany it's Hermes, and they are cooperating with ABB and finding financing. Insurances for projects where ABB is taking a part. And in such schemes, customers, first of all, get a very low interest rate. Second, they can invest at the beginning only 15%. And also they can use this money not only for ABB products and solutions, but also for local purposes.
Alexander, is this the right way to go? Would you agree with what Boris is saying?
Yes,
Igor, sorry.
Yes, it's a real thing, and but there are some differences in sustainable development goals from international corporations and local corporations. So I hope in my presentation I can show you a little bit.
Is it working now? I'm not sure. The presentation, the PPT. We might have to move it back a bit to the lunch break, probably. It's here. Yeah, it's running.
So now I am deputy head of United Nations Global Corp organization in Russia, and my presentation shows you some activity in this field in Russia. So you know that United Nations declared 17 SDG goals until 2030 in 2015, and so we have. Global compensation in Russia. It's more than 60 companies, and we are part of regional network Europe, and we are at advanced level. Now we have more than 20 events per year, and we invite you to participate in our events. There are, for the last 3 years, there are several research we published in Russia. It's mainly interesting is Russian Federal State Statistical Service report and the report of Analytical Center belong to Government of Russian Federation. And also we have 5 private research. We show you at the right side of the slide. One of this research, KPMG research, shows that highest level for implementing SDG goals is FMCG sector, petroleum, gas industry, telecommunications sector, and IT. Some sectors in the middle, like electric power, pharmaceuticals, financial sector, chemical industry. But there are some problems with implementing SDG in retail, agriculture, transport, construction, and foreign industry. Now they are in Russia at the low SDG. In Global Contact Network have special research for investigation of SDG goals in current activity. It's more than 32 Russian strategic enterprise participated in this research. More than 50% of the Russian unions of entrepreneurs participants. Now we show you that SDG priority for Russian businesses There are two questions. SDG is highest priority, and second question, SDG rated as perspective for 2-5 years. And we see that there are a little difference between these. The main idea for highest priority is 8.3, and for perspective is 12.8. We compare SDG goals in Russia and in the world. You see that all three research in Russia show that so the SDG number 8 is the toppest priority for all Russian companies. But in the world, we see another situation. The toppest is 9, 11, or 8, and sometimes 4 also. This slide shows the what's meaning of SDG goals for businesses. Some of the businesses take care that federal authorities must create some rules for this, but Russian branches of international companies think that the most part of the activity must belong to private business. And this is only small details for development of responsible finance in Russia for the last 3 years. It's Central Bank of Russia creating special Russian sustainable working group. Also, Moscow Stock Exchange must special section of sustainable development with 3 segments. It's green bonds, social bonds, and national projects bonds. Also, there are 3 stock indexes at Russian Stock Exchange. It's a vector of sustainable activity and openness in Russia. Now, Moscow Stock Exchange from last year also participated in global initiative, sustainable stock exchanges globally. And now you see that first the green bond starts in Russia last year. And for current year, the main idea is creation of a Russian Code of Responsible Investment. We hope we see this code this year. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Great, let's get back to the now. You mentioned the SDGs, all the efforts for sustainable development goals in Russia that you're doing. I would like to ask, who is now responsible for implementing the SDGs, right? Is it more the national governments? Is it the responsibility of the private sector? What do you think, Linar? Whose responsibility is it to engage those stakeholders in the SDGs?
Well, first of all, I think it's joint efforts, responsibility of both the government and the private sector. I think we have quite interesting case with the solar power industry of Kazakhstan, for example. One of our companies, jointly with Chinese and French, we set up a consortium and took over solar power industry, basically, which was created by the government, and we took part in the privatization and then developing it further. But then I think it took us almost 2 years to clear up all kind of obstacles, and we couldn't move any further unless government really understood that in order to enhance and to give next push to this industry, there are a lot of initiatives that has to be approved on the parliamentarian level, on the government level, on the industry overall. And I think this is a good case that where we approach to the level where after a certain period of time, we realized that only joint efforts, the special working group was created and things like that, with the governments, with private sector, with association of renewable energy and things like that. And then we reached to the level where the thing finally start moving smoothly. And I think this is a good example how private sector, government, and other stakeholders certainly have to be involved in this kind of activities.
It needs a collaborative effort. Now, apart from stakeholder engagement, it also needs more technical assistance.
That's right.
You, Christina, as a space lady, right, you know what kind of technology needs to be involved. So what kind of technical assistance would you hope to see? We need to exchange mics.
Well, you brought up solar energy. Well, where did that come from? The space program. People take for granted the things that the space program has given us. And obviously, Russia was the leader. It was a space race between Russia and the U.S., and I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that, especially now with NASA. NASA is starting to try to pull back and let a lot of the commercial companies take over a lot of the technologies. And I think that there's a huge opportunity here for many, many people. But the part of the problem is people have very short-term thinking. And in order to make any of these things successful, you need to have a long-term plan. China is actually very committed. They have a 20 to 30-year plan in space. Space technologies, they have huge solar farms, but they're also very committed to getting to the moon, to mine the ice, to have water, develop technologies that are outside of our atmosphere. They're signing agreements with governments all over the world. Unfortunately, not with the US. Hopefully at some point we can fix that, but I know they're very tied to Russia. I think that there's an opportunity in all the SDGs, like I said, solar energy, learning how to grow food, in space where there's no water. If you can refine that, the commercial companies can take that research and development and use that for regions that are struggling. Having the government regulations working with the commercial companies so that the government helps enable the processes, but the commercial companies can actually capitalize on it and develop these things. But with long-term thinking, I think is really, really critical.
That's a very exciting outlook. Mr. Teplitskaia, now of course all of these projects, especially in infrastructure, they need a huge size of investment. Are governments, are customers, willing to cash in, do you think? And what size of investment are we looking at?
Well, I'm not prepared to address this statistically because it all depends indeed on the region. However, infrastructure development is indeed highest priority, I think, in every country, be it Russia or United States, and indeed the Caspian region, because depending on infrastructure development, the economy, it's a blood vessel system, circular for the economy, and without infrastructure, no economic growth, and consequently, good well-being of the people of the countries are possible. So when it comes to Sberbank, of course, the bank finances mega infrastructure projects, many of which are cross-border, and many of them are energy related. But we don't finance just the pipelines, which we indeed do, but we support and finance the renewable energy projects. We have so-called green bonds to support investments in green projects. We have a green agenda at Sberbank to make sure that we lead by example, but we also instill this among our clients. And indeed, government and corporate partnerships are key. Without this kind of collaboration, without cohesion in our actions, we will not be able to fulfill any of the goals and to engage the stakeholders. So I think I agree that we have to work hand in hand, and indeed infrastructure, it connects us all. And when we think about the energy infrastructure, when we think about railroads, and some of them are symbolic like the Silk Road, but there are more and more tangible projects like railroads, for example, that connect people and allow for the economy to actually boom.
We will have time for 2 questions from the floor. I would just like to give the last word to Boris. And then we have a signing ceremony and lunch. Boris, when we talk about SDG stakeholder engagement, what has the top priority for you now as someone coming from the corporate world?
Yeah, well, I would like to agree with our partners here today that it's not just about money, obviously. It's about sustainability. It's about long-term investment. I would like to give a quick example how we managed the project in one of the countries of Caspian region. It was actually Russia, where a private company had invested $500 million in a small town. And obviously, for the private investor, the objective was to make a sustainable long-term project. You cannot expect to get a return in a year. It's much longer than that. There was no infrastructure locally, so we managed to work with the banks. We managed to engage the local governments. We managed to get some benefit from the federal government, so that there was financing for the highways, financing for railways. There was also a need to engage private investors from an insurance industry, for example, to help improve the social system there as well, because there were not enough clinics, there were not enough hospitals there, and if you bring about 5,000 employees to a new project, there will be about 20,000 more people coming up there. So that cannot be done by any one party. The government cannot afford to do it in the short term. Private sector cannot do it. So it was a great example of collaboration, which ended up very well, and it's a great sustainable project now.
Fantastic. Who from the floor would like to ask a question? Please raise your hand, identify yourself, keep the question short, and tell us who you would like to ask the question to. Maybe people are hungry and waiting for lunch already downstairs. I can smell it already. Any question? No? Otherwise, yes, some comment from the panelists? Oh, yes?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Hi, El. Is there a microphone, or can I borrow one of yours? Or you just raise your voice? Yeah? I know you have a strong voice.
My name is Helen. I work in sustainable investments and technologies. Just interested, for example, between Afghanistan and Switzerland, what could be cross-border stakeholder collaborations like this cross-border? Within one country, it's already complicated, but how Switzerland can transform their work in sustainability, for example, and how we engage stakeholders in Switzerland to Afghanistan?
That's a question for Minister Mastur.
Okay, just before coming to that point, I had a comment, something to add before coming to that point. At least one thing for the success of the long journey that we have between now and 2030 is how well this agenda is coordinated at the country level. At least in my country, it is going at the highest level. At the Office of Chief Executive, which is equivalent to the Prime Minister position in other countries. I, as a Minister of Economy and the Country Director of the UNDP, we co-chair a group which is full of all stakeholders every month. And then we have a SDG-centered economic model, so that it is more standard approach or strategy to reach to those goals. Coming to that point, I hope I got it well. Yesterday and the day before yesterday, we've discussed a lot about connectivity, cross-border energy transmissions and support, particularly when we were discussing about the demand in my country, the demand in South Asia, and the energy-rich countries in the Eurasia region or Central Asian countries. We've discussed a lot, and different models were presented here. At least one project which was discussed yesterday about TAP, which is going very well. It just less than 3 years, and it is already in the implementation stage. And then we also discussed about TAPI, which is another gas pipeline project between Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, which it started the initial discussions in 1990, and still we are expecting something in 2020 to be started. So different models are there, but at least cross-border between two countries, it is much easier. We already have our projects with Tajikistan, with Uzbekistan, with Turkmenistan, with Iran. But different models, but then how in renewable energy, and how with the knowledge that you have and experience you have in Switzerland with the countries around you can help my country, which is also a landlocked country. We can discuss it further.
Ms. Teplitskaia would like to add something to your question, Haya?
I would like to add the importance, stress the importance of digitalization. Our bank is no longer just a bank. We are IT company with a banking license. And it means that we continue serving our clients, but we created an ecosystem. And huge emphasis in our operations and in our aspirations is dedicated to smart cities. And smart cities mean smart regions, smart countries. And we have our latest project, the Smart Campus, because once you go digital, you can outreach, you can engage the stakeholders, and you can de facto actually implement the SDG goals among others. But this is an integral part of the digital infrastructure without development of which developmental goals are impossible to achieve.
Would somebody else from the panel like to make a final remark? Yes, maybe Igor first and then Christina.
Yeah, maybe I have some comments to my neighbors regarding long-term projects. I would like that audience leave with the right understanding of this topic, because definitely we need long-term projects, but at the same time we need a short, long-term projects for corporations, for companies, for small companies who really have to survive every day. And probably it could be a good idea if long-term projects could be divided by small ones, and that could be approach how we can solve really big global issues.
Christina.
Just the one thing I wanted to add is the International Space Station is the best example of 13 countries cooperating all over the world, peaceful cooperation above the atmosphere. So if there's some way to try to take a look at how they do that, and that includes the US and Russia, which maybe don't have the best relationship in many other ways, but when it comes to the space program, they're hand in hand. They're very, very cooperative, as well as with the European Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency. So I say that, obviously I'm a space cadet, I'm a space believer, but I think it is a great model to take a look at and to try to figure out how we have cooperated in those ways and maybe do it in, on the ground between countries as well.
If it's possible in space, it should also be possible on Earth. Thank you so much, dear panelists. Great job. Thank you very much.